if you chemically or electrically activate this brain area in the loser, that loser becomes the winner. If you quiet this brain area in the winner or an animal that's about to win, it suddenly becomes the loser. So you say, what in the world is this brain area doing? There's a classic experiment in behavioral biology called the tube test, where you take two mice, you put them in a tube, and they try and push each other out. They fight for that tube. And one mouse inevitably pushes out the other mouse. The one that stays in the tube is the winner. The one that got pushed out is called the loser. What's interesting is that if you take those same mice and give them new competitors, the one that won has a much higher than chance probability of being a winner the subsequent battle. The loser has a much higher probability of losing. Now that's the first experiment. And you can go, okay, well, winners become winners, losers become losers. But it's actually far more interesting than that. Because if you take the loser and you put him against even a known winner and you push the loser from behind, the loser becomes the winner and the winner becomes the loser. And even if the effort that the loser that became the winner exerted wasn't their own, right? You've got a human pushing with a stick on this little mouse. So the important thing is the third experiment, which only arrived a few years ago. This is an experiment that was published in the journal Science. Science and Nature are our Super Bowl and NBA championships of science. 99% rejection rates, very stringent, thoroughly peer-reviewed, not just any publications. A laboratory, not mine, did the experiment where they monitored the brains of these mice while they were engaging in this tube test battle. And they found that there was one brain area, it's a sub-region of the prefrontal cortex, not the whole prefrontal cortex, that's more active in the winner and less active in the loser. So much so that if you chemically or electrically activate this brain area in the loser, that loser becomes the winner. If you quiet this brain area in the winner or an animal that's about to win, it suddenly becomes the loser. So you say, what in the world is this brain area doing to the body and to the psychology of these mice? Now, we don't know the psychology of the mice, but they did do some important controls. And it's not testosterone. Although there's a testosterone increase associated with winning, it is not testosterone in the moment. It's not cortisol. It's not any of the other normal things that you might look to. It's not muscle strength. It turns out that stimulation of this brain area that causes winning is associated with increased anxiety, effort, and adrenaline. And all it does is it converts that anxiety into more steps forward per unit time. Literally just steps forward. So if you take this brain area and you quiet it for a given level of stress, the animal backs up a little bit more or pauses a little bit more. If you stimulate this brain area for the same amount of stress, the animal advances a little bit more as opposed to pauses or backs up. And the thing that's really key to take away from this for everyone's individual lives and goals is that if you really think about it, you always have only three options. You can either be stationary, you can back up, you can retreat, or you can go forward. And you want to move forward in an adaptive way. You don't want to walk off a cliff or do something stupid financially or physically, but anxiety and stress and what we call autonomic arousal were designed to move us. They create a sense of agitation and discomfort for a reason, but it wasn't just designed to move us to run and hide. It was also designed to move us forward. And a lot of people take the agitation, the fear, the anxiety about starting something new, and they try and work with that and push down on it. There's just so much in our culture that's about trying to get homeostasis, a word that I really despise, that homeostasis and trying to get back to this place of calm or flow so that they can move forward. And what they don't appreciate, what people haven't been told because the science is very new, is that all forms of adaptive behavior in the animal kingdom and in humans, whether or not it's with the mind or the body or both, involve a fairly high level of stress and anxiety that was designed to move us forward. And it doesn't have to be just competition and battle. This could be writing your book. This could be finding the mate that you want to find, a life mate. It could be any number of different things that you're going to pursue. There's always anxiety associated with that. And trying to bypass that could actually represent the failure of our species. I actually worry that if humans keep seeking for these comfort zones at the outset of effort, we could actually devolve as opposed to evolve. Wow. And it's not supposed to feel good at the beginning, folks. It doesn't feel good for any animal. It's not supposed to feel good for you and me. And I will balance this with something about restoration and recovery of this process, but it's so vital. And I think it's why the movie Rocky, why cancer survivors, why the Rosa Parks story, why David Goggins, why these stories evoke such a deep sense of inspiration in us, is because it's as tapping into something as vital and primitively important as thirst or hunger or the desire to mate. It's at the core of how we got to where we are, and it's at the core of how we're going to move forward. The prefrontal cortex is just a kind of frontal real estate. We have a lot more of it than mice do. It's the area of the brain that actually causes humans a lot of neurotic discomfort because it's so good at thinking and multitasking. Just a little fun tidbit: we can multi-track, we can multitask. Anyone says that you can't multitask has never picked up a neuroscience textbook. There's something called covert attention. We can split our attention between two things very easily. I can look at you, for instance, and I can monitor the periphery of the room at the same time if I wanted to. I can also bring my full attention to just our conversation, which is what I'm doing. So we can split our attention. We can multitask. What we need to do is, when we want to get better at something, we need to bring our full attention to that thing, and we need to start to engage to this internal reward process. I just want to briefly say about internal versus external rewards. The car you've always wanted, the watch you've always wanted, the piece of jewelry you've always wanted, the reward is still internal. You don't take that watch and cram it in your ear and dopamine gets, released. The dopamine release is always internal. The key is to learn how to attach some internal process of thinking and self-reward to the release of dopamine. And the brain wants to do that. It wants to learn how to do that. But as long as we're backing away from anxiety, stress, and trying to get super calm at the front end of the pursuit, then there's no way you can get there. You're in a pause mode or retreat mode. You are the losing mouse. You want to be the winning mouse. You want to take more steps forward per unit time. That's all it is. If you're somebody who has anxiety, or you find that you're just burning too much energy, you're finishing your days grinding or depleted, that's where sometimes it's called superoxygenation, but really should be called carbon dioxide offloading breath practice should come into play. It's very simple. You sit down, never do it near water. Don't do it lying. You don't do it driving, but you can sit down or lie down. You inhale and exhale 25 times. Be a little forceful about it, and after the 25th one or 30th, doesn't matter so much, exhale all your air and hold your breath for 15 seconds and stay calm while you experience that heightened level of activation. What you're doing with those 25 or 30 breaths is you're triggering the release of adrenaline into your system. You're creating a little mild form of stress. You might say, well, why would you want to do that? Well, when you exhale and you remain calm, you're now teaching the brain to be calm when you have a shot of adrenaline in your system. You can accomplish the same thing through an ice bath or a cold shower and learning to relax in that kind of confrontational situation. But there's nothing quite like breathing because, and here I'm quoting David Spiegel again, he always says, it's not just about the state you're in, but whether or not you had anything to do with getting there, right? When you self-induce these states, you're teaching your brain how to drive and kind of maneuver within these different states of mind. It's different than like driving along and all of a sudden you're skidding on ice, or you're in a blanket of fog. It's sort of like you're turning on and off the fog. You're learning how to drive in fog by turning on and off fog, where you're going black ice and then onto nice dry concrete. So it's a process that you can learn to play with. Now, if you really want to get good at it and kind of push it, you can do these 25 breaths, exhale, hold your breath for 5 to 15 seconds, then inhale and hold. But you have to be careful. If you have cardiopulmonary issues or heart issues, you definitely want to talk to a doctor first because it does build up a lot of pressure in your system, but that will ramp up the intensity more. And so what this is really doing is it's increasing your threshold for what you consider stressful. It's self-induced stress inoculation. So you can also sit in an ice bath and learn how to stay calm in an ice bath. You can also get into an argument with your spouse and learn how to stay calm, but I don't recommend that one. So these are ways of teaching our nervous system using physiology how to calm down and how to tolerate discomfort from a place of calm and clarity, both of which are powerful. One of the absolutely pathologic situations for any animal or human is to be able to access repeated dopamine surges without effort or any pursuit that's self-directed or that's directed, I should say. So for instance, cocaine, a drug which potently increases dopamine, or methamphetamine, which potently increases methamphetamine, but doesn't require any sort of adaptive action pursuit except to acquire the drug and spend money on it.
No sacrifice.
They'll sacrifice. So what ends up happening is the circuit that gets rewarded is only the drug-seeking behavior, and no other behavior will give the kind of potent dopamine release that cocaine or methamphetamine will, which is why they are so pernicious. Now, likewise,
right.
I'm not...
Well, plus they have that powerful reinforcing effect, right? So not only do you get that kick, but what's reinforced by the dopamine release is the behaviors that were right prior, particularly right prior to the ingestion. And if all that is the drug-taking behavior, that's all that develops.
That's right.
You build that monster inside your head.
That's right.
So I can see where you're going on the pornography front.
Right. So I was starting to get a lot of questions. I was kind of surprised. I thought, well, I'm male and, maybe that's why they feel comfortable asking. But people were saying, we're asking about pornography, and they were asking, I realized we want to, I'll just be direct about it. They were asking whether or not masturbation was bad. They were asking whether or not masturbation with ejaculation was particularly bad. And here's my stance on this. I'm a biologist and a neuroscientist, not a psychologist. But what we know for sure is that if an individual repeatedly engages in this circuitry, let's say masturbation and pornography with increasingly potent forms of stimulation that are on a screen, a couple of things happen. First of all, what's being reinforced? What's being reinforced is a high dopaminergic response to watching other people engage in sexual behavior, which is very different than being in a first-person sexual experience. Okay, so right there, that what's being reinforced is not actually any kind of improvement in communication skills. It's voyeurism. And as these questions started to come in more and more, I started to realize there was a lot of kind of undertones of people talking about fear of or experience with sexual dysfunction that clearly pornography can lead to. And here I'm specifically talking about males. I actually don't know the literature on females. So here I'm talking about...
Females don't use visual pornography to the same degree.
I see.
They use literary pornography.
I see. So, and then you start to think about, okay, what happens in the cascade or the arc of sexual arousal and orgasm? What happens is that initially there's it's parasympathetically dominant, meaning if somebody is too stressed, they actually can't engage in sexual behavior. The arousal response doesn't occur. Erection is blunted, but the actual orgasm response and ejaculation is strongly associated with the so-called sympathetic nervous system, which has nothing to do with sympathy. It has everything to do with, it's a kind of a stress response. And then it reverses to a parasympathetic response. And a hormone called prolactin increases dramatically after ejaculation in males. What does that do? That blunts dopamine release and testosterone for a very long period of time, which makes sense if pair bonding and sort of, in our species anywhere, there's this idea that then other molecules would be exchanged with partners, pair bonding, potential for raising mates, etc. Without getting into a huge discussion about that, the point is this: masturbation and pornography are potently tapping into the dopamine system and can undermine the very processes of what I consider healthy processes of finding a mate, dating, communication, eventually, if it's appropriate, sexual interaction, etc.
Like it's undermining pair bonding.
And pair bonding.
So here's a question. If you're seeking sexual release through pornography and you go through the whole cycle and you get a prolactin release, do you bond with yourself?
So this is very interesting. The biology explains it as what's left there is a kind of an open loop, a kind of an emptiness, right? Because bonding with the self is a complicated notion. I mean, there's a healthy version of that, of course, loving oneself and self-referencing. And again, this is more far more your domain than mine in terms of what a healthy self-relation is. But in the absence of a real partner there, absence of real sexual partner, there's an open loop of neurochemicals, including oxytocin and prolactin. The dopamine, remember, dopamine goes up during pursuit, anticipation, then peaks and then crashes below baseline after orgasm and ejaculation. So this kind of low that people fear is putting them into an amotivated state. We can think of this, if I were to kind of expand on it, would be, it's this kind of neurochemical, psychological equivalent of making your home environment filthy for a while, not actually putting you into this positive amplification of dopamine. So it depletes the dopamine system. And it's likewise in drugs of abuse and addiction, it eventually depletes the dopamine system. Initially, there's a huge dopamine surge with drugs of abuse like methamphetamine and cocaine. But over time, people are using more and more to achieve what is not such a great high. You even see this a little bit with kind of consumption of energy drinks. Like people are taking more and more chemicals within their energy drinks, and they're thinking about loud, fast music, energy drinks. It's kind of stacking of dopaminergic tools. Now that's not as pathologic. In fact, there are some energy drinks I'll occasionally drink and I enjoy them. I don't think we need to be entirely afraid of pursuing or engaging in things that release dopamine. Obviously, healthy sexual behavior, food that we love, social engagement, all of these things can be dopaminergic. It's the big peaks in dopamine that are not associated with any prior effort or organization of self that are particularly dangerous for the human being.
Yeah, well, you could see that's a cardinal danger of affluence then.
That's right. This is why the children of
That's right. You cannot get rats addicted to cocaine if they live in their natural environments.
Is that right?
You can only get rats addicted to cocaine if they're isolated rats in a cage. Yeah, they won't bar press for cocaine in a natural environment, and it's because they have alternative sources of dopaminergic gratification.
Very interesting.
So it's very interesting.
Yeah, the children of very wealthy people who are overindulged. I've seen that many times, many times, and it is a very sad sight.
Well, they're not optimally deprived, eh? And that issue of optimal deprivation, that's a killer issue for an affluent society.
There's an additional issue with pornography, which is not often discussed, which is that, remember, guys in particular, the brain is a learning prediction machine. And if I'm not trying to say that all pornography is bad, but there are good data to support the idea that if your brain learns to be aroused by watching other people have sex, it is not necessarily going to carry over to the ability to get aroused when you're one-on-one with somebody else, right? Especially young kids who are consuming a lot of pornography, the brain is learning sexual arousal to other people having sex.
So you're going to program yourself into being a voyeur,
or just create challenges in sexual interactions with peers, with a real partner. Right?
Mary Harrington has the 3 laws of pornodynamics, and the second law of pornodynamics is the law of FAP entropy. And it says that whatever you start out wanking to will get progressively more intense over time. And I think that this is sort of speaking to that ever sort of escalating amount of the wildness that you need to watch in order to get an ever decreasing stimulus that comes back.
And here I'm approaching this only through the lens of biology, right? I'm not a psychologist, and I'm certainly not political in any way. At least not. I have ideas about politics, but I just don't discuss them publicly. But the idea here is that I'm not saying pornography as a stimulus is bad or good. What I'm saying is, in its availability and its extreme forms, it's a very potent stimulus, and very potent stimuli of any kind, extremely palatable food, extreme pornography, extreme experiences like bungee cord jumping, those set a threshold for dopamine release. And Anna will tell you that, and I'm sure she did, that the higher the dopamine peak, the bigger the drop afterwards. And it's not that you drop to baseline, you drop below baseline. Again, it's not, these things aren't good or bad, they just have to be controlled in a way, because when people are pursuing dopamine peaks over and over and over and they aren't getting them, typically it's because they've been pursuing that activity far too often.
And you're saying perhaps take a break from that, and there may be an ability for your system to reset.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in theory, all the things that we're talking about with pornography could be superimposed onto food, or could be superimposed onto real sex, right? That one also has to be cautious there, right? But the cycling back and forth between dopamine and low dopamine states, dopamine fasting as it were, but maybe just low dopamine states, these are natural rhythms that existed in the nervous system. We have to remember what the dopaminergic system is there for. I'll say it again, I wasn't consulted at the design phase, but we know as a generic form of motivation and pursuit. You can imagine the human or the animal that's hungry or thirsty. It needs energy to go pursue the thing. So the idea that you have to eat in order to get energy, that's true, but you need energy in order to get the thing to eat. So our nervous system has energy also. That's dopamine and epinephrine. Yes, we use glucose and glycogen, etc., when we're pursuing things, but the idea here is you're pursuing something, and then either by smell or by sight, you think you're on the right track. So you go down that track, and then, there it is. You get some berries, or you get, let's get prehistoric about this, or you get to kill the prey and eat it, and then it gives you energy to continue this pursuit or to reproduce. I mean, there's a reason why humans and other animals seek out reproduction, is that every species, but certainly humans, have 2 innate desires built into them. Whether or not they decide to actualize this or not is the desire to protect young and make more of its own species. Every successful species does that. Even if people don't have children, in general, people care about children